Dexter Lawrence. Could Miami make a blockbuster trade with the New York Giants for one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL? That is the topic of today's show. I am Nic Rohloff. Welcome into Dolphins Today by Chat Sports. Have a good weekend, everybody. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of today's show, I do want to make this very preface because I have some thoughts on the matter, but this trade was suggested by Bleacher Report in an article that had 3 potential blockbuster moves Miami could make prior to the NFL season getting underway. I think it was a good enough topic to talk about, but I'm just not so sure how realistic this option actually is for the Fins. But before we start talking about Big Dex from New York City, we are in a sub-battle, and we have exactly 1 week until the month of May is over, and we're playing the Smelly Patriots in our May sub-battle this month, and we only lead by 11. We're in the lead, but we're entering fourth quarter territory the last week of the month, so hit that sub button. We put out daily content surrounding the Dolphins. We're also going to start live shows coming up in a couple weeks, so hit that sub button and join us here at Dolphins Today. Even though I'm not so sure how likely a trade for Dexter Lawrence is, it must be said how good this guy actually is at the game of football. He is an absolute beast on the interior defensive line, and he has really just broken out for New York over the past 2 seasons. Listen, he was already good prior to that and was a first-round pick out of Clemson, but he's taken his game to new heights over the past 2 years. You see his numbers, combining for 12 sacks over the past 2 seasons. That's pretty impressive for an interior defensive lineman. Getting to the quarterback also often as well, and he is a really good run defender as well. He has made the Pro Bowl and been a second-team All-Pro over the past 2 seasons. You see the stats on screen, but how about PFF and the grades that they gave him over the past 2 years? They are just flat-out absurd. Like, these numbers, I had to do a triple check to make sure they were actually accurate when I was doing my little research on Dexter Lawrence. A 92 overall PFF grade, back-to-back years, 92-plus pass rushing grade in back-to-back years, and then 80-plus run defense grades as well from PFF. This guy has been on a different planet in terms of stopping the run, grabbing double teams over the middle on the interior the interior offensive line, and also getting after the pass rusher. And to me, when I'm thinking of Dexter Lawrence and what he has done in the NFL and where he stands, I think this is the second best interior defensive lineman in the National Football League, behind one man and one man only. That is Chris Jones from the Chiefs. Chris Jones is just a different planet. I mean, we could all agree on that. Christian Wilkins is also up there as well. Obviously, he left Miami for Las Vegas in free agency. But with Aaron Donald retiring, I think Dexter Lawrence is the second best interior defensive lineman in the NFL. And when we're talking a Dexter Lawrence trade, I do have to say this, even though he is a stud and labeled out why Miami would want to trade for him because of how good and dominant he has been for Big Blue, he would not come cheap in a trade. It would cost quite a bit of draft capital to acquire Dexter Lawrence, and it would also be expensive on the cap, which is probably the main reason why I think it's a little unlikely. We'll talk about both what it would cost and what it would charge Miami against the cap here in just a second. But after seeing his statistics and see how dominating he actually is for the Giants defense, would you trade for Dexter Lawrence to bring him and be a part of this Miami Dolphins defense to pair up with Zach Sealer to make, once again, one of the biggest and best 1-2 punches on the interior defensive line in the NFL? Type Y for yes or type N for no. I mean, I would. In a perfect world, and that's really what it has to be for Miami, man. It has to be somehow the perfect situation for the Dolphins to acquire Dexter Lawrence. When you just look at the financial side of it, which we're going to look at his contract and what it would cost in a trade, it is tough. But there is no denying what Miami lacks on the interior defensive line. Zach Sealer is now taking on that defensive tackle, interior defensive line, whatever you want to call it, that number 1 spot for the first time in his career. He is coming off of a season where he tallied up 10 sacks. Yes, you heard that correctly if you were not aware of that. But a lot was because Christian Wilkins held a lot of double teams, and the interior defensive line for Miami was a driving force of that defense a season ago. Well, I'm just not so sure how Zach Sealer is going to hold up as the number one guy when opposing interior offensive lines are keying in on him. Tier Tart and Neville Gallimore are intriguing guys, but they're very spotty and could end up being very bad for the Dolphins. So it is very intriguing to potentially add Dexter Lawrence and create another elite 1-2 punch. But like I mentioned a couple times already throughout the show, the issue is the money aspect of acquiring Dexter Lawrence. The Dolphins don't have any cap space right now, but after June 1st, when Xavier Howard's contract comes off the book, you will now get another $18.1 million, so you will have some flexibility in that right. And when you look at Dexter Lawrence's contract, it's pretty pricey. Now, his cap hit for 2024 isn't that bad. It's only $14.5 million, but it only increases as the contract goes up, 24, 27, 26, before becoming an unrestricted free agent in 2028. This is the first year of a 4-year, $87 million deal that he signed with the New York Giants. So if Lawrence was dealt, well, it would have to be picked up by the Dolphins. And we'll talk about why that really doesn't work here in just a second. But make sure you do get some Dolphins gear. I love quarter zips. I wear quarter zips all the time. And the versatility of them is just second to none. And this quarter zip is an absolute beast. I actually just got it in the mail on, what day was it? It was Wednesday night I got it in the mail. I'm very excited to wear it on some future Dolphin shows and Dolphins game days. But get yours today and rock it with me at chatsports.com/Dolphins Q-Zip. That link will be in the description and comments of today's video. Take advantage right now and grab this quarter zip. All right, the real issue with potentially acquiring Dexter Lawrence, we've mentioned the money, but it's also the limitations it would put on you as a franchise moving forward. Like, you can make it work this season. As I mentioned, like, you could restructure a Bradley Chubb contract, get $4 million in cap space. Then you get Xavier Howard's money coming off the books, and you're at $22 million in cap space in the offseason. Well, then you could take on a contract that is only being a cap hit of $14 million this year. But the issue is the future, because you still have to pay that Bradley Chubb contract where he's getting paid $25+ million over the next 3-4 seasons. Tua Tagovailoa is getting an extension. Tyreek Hill is getting paid money and is up for an extension in a couple of years. Jaylen Waddle is up for extension next offseason. Jevon Holland's up for an extension now. Like Dexter Lawrence, if you were to add him into this room, would only limit your ability to pay some of these guys, and it would force Chris Grier to make some decisions. Jaelan Phillips being one of them. Like, if you acquire Dexter Lawrence, like, Jaelan Phillips probably is gone after his 5th year, because you already are paying Bradley Chubb, you'd be paying Dexter Lawrence, and you have Chop Robinson and Mohamed Kamara, it'd probably be out of Jaelan Phillips. So that's the main issue I have here. You're sacrificing some of the young, good talent you have on your roster and their future with this organization to add Dexter Lawrence just right now. That's my issue. But I do want to talk about what the trade would be if the Dolphins did make this deal. And I said off the top, this trade was suggested, an idea by Bleacher Report. This was their trade idea. The Dolphins acquiring Dexter Lawrence for just a 2nd-round pick and a 5th-round pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. And listen, as much as I've been probably negative against this move because of the financial implications, if you were to get Dexter Lawrence for this price, the value is fantastic. Like, we talked about how good he is as a player and how dominant and impactful he is for that Giants defense off the top. You get that dominating force on the interior of your defensive line for only a 2nd and a 5th-round pick. Yeah, I would sign up for that, because the Dolphins would obviously still have their first. They're getting 2 third-round comp picks due to Robert Hunt and Christian Wilkins leaving in free agency. You would still have draft capital even after losing a 2nd and 5th-round pick, and you would acquire one of the best, if not a top 3 interior defensive linemen in the National Football League. So would you do this trade? That's the question of today's show. Type A for accept or type D for decline. You can answer this without thinking of the money. You could answer it by also thinking about the money. Give me your votes down below. I am going to answer this question based on the future implications and the money. And that is why, sadly, I'm declining. I don't even know if it would ever really be on the table for Miami, and if Chris Grier would even try to target and call up Joe Schoen in New York to get Dexter Lawrence. I just don't think he will because he knows that he's got to pay the piper of some of those young guys on this roster already that I mentioned. So I don't think he's going to jeopardize their future by trading for Dexter Lawrence, although it would make the Dolphins probably a top 5 defense in the National Football League. And just can't afford the commitment, man. Like I don't want to harp on the same point for too long here, folks, but it really is to me just about the future of this franchise and some of the young guys that they would like to have on this team for the next 5-6 years that they would unable to do so because of acquiring Dexter Lawrence. It's a shame, but it is what it is. All right, that's going to do it for today's video. Appreciate everyone for tuning in. If you've watched out through the entire video, you obviously like what we're doing here, so hit that sub button. Join us because we're putting out daily content. And as I mentioned, we got to beat the Patriots in our sub battle, and live shows are starting up in the next 2 or 3 weeks as well. Weekly live shows in the offseason. Don't miss those. So hit that sub button.